Tardes. Para la Bolsa Nacional de Valores y para Interclear es un verdadero placer darles la bienvenida a este evento, tanto a ustedes que se encuentran de forma presencial como también a las personas que se encuentran vía nuestras redes sociales. Hoy es un día muy especial porque presentamos a un nuevo emisor en el mercado de capitales costarricenses. Estamos hablando de Génesis Latam SAFI, quien también se convierte en el nuevo segundo emisor del 2023. Quiero presentar a la mesa principal. Tenemos a la señora Lauren Barton, al señor Gregory Scott, a James Scott y a Bernardo Arce, junto a César Restrepo, que es el director de la Bolsa Nacional de Valores, a quien también le pido pasar adelante para que les tenga unas palabras a todos ustedes.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes a todos. Muchísimas gracias por estar acá. Muchísimas gracias también a Lauren Barton, James Barton, Gregory, Scott Barton y Bernardo Arce. Un placer tenerlos acá. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure. Y a todas las personas que nos acompañan también en los medios, a través de los medios digitales. Como lo decía Daryl, hoy es un día muy importante porque es nuestro segundo nuevo emisor en el año. Para alcanzar las metas y los requisitos que tenemos al interior de cada vez más fomentar el mercado de capitales. El año pasado tuvimos 7 nuevos emisores y este año tenemos el reto de continuar con esa senda creciente. Definitivamente tener nuevos emisores es supremamente importante, no solamente para la Bolsa de Valores, sino para todo lo que tiene que ver con los inversionistas, poder abrir el espectro y tener más capacidad de productos para ofrecer, y esto nos pueda generar mayor profundidad en el mercado y diferentes alternativas de inversión. Ahora, a través de este nuevo fondo de Génesis Latam SAFI, estamos trayendo no solamente un nuevo fondo, sino diferentes tipos de activos a los locales que normalmente se han ofrecido en el mercado, y con esto poder ofrecer productos alternativos diferentes y tener oportunidad de diversificar y tener oportunidades de diversificación para todos los inversionistas que estén interesados y que cumplan con los perfiles de riesgo para este tipo de activos. Este fondo seguramente ahora ya nos van a dar las explicaciones, pero un fondo que tiene una emisión proyectada de $50 millones, en donde les deseamos la mayor de los éxitos en este nuevo inicio que arrancan con este fondo de inversión. Y a todos ustedes, muchísimas gracias por estar acá y bienvenidos.
Muchas gracias a don César por sus palabras. Génesis Latam SAFI es una empresa costarricense que se dedica a la compra de edificios alquilados exclusivamente al gobierno de los Estados Unidos y también se dedica al desarrollo de proyectos inmobiliarios en el país. Invitamos a seguir al señor James Barton, cofundador de Génesis Latam SAFI, quien también dirigirá unas palabras para todos nosotros.
We're privileged to be here. We thank the Interclear, the Bolsa, for the opportunity of making this presentation. I have the privilege of giving you an introduction of the fund and the particulars that relate to the fund. The Génesis Latam Fund is based exclusively on U.S. government office buildings. There are no other types of office buildings in the fund. There are no other tenants than those that are the agencies of the U.S. government. When the fund purchases an office building, it will be fully leased. It will have a long-term lease of anywhere from 10 to 20 years. The federal government is one of the longest tenant holders in the history of real estate, because they often renew the long-term leases 2 or 3 or 4 times. And you'll hear more about that later. The returns that the fund will be providing will be enhanced by adding leverage. The leverage will be up to 60% on a portfolio basis. In addition to very stable leases, the leases provide that if there are expenses that are increased because of inflation, that some of the expenses are indexed to the price index, and as the inflation expenses go up, the government will reimburse the owner of the building for the additional expenses caused by inflation. The same thing happens with real estate in a different way, because real estate taxes in the United States apply to all buildings, and the fund will own the buildings. So it will be necessary that the fund pay real estate taxes. The amount of the tax is set when the lease is signed, and irrespective of the lease being 10, 15, 20 years, the U.S. government will reimburse any increases in taxes that occurred from the first year of the lease. So there are additional enhancements that occur with the properties that will be in the fund. The fund is managed by Genesis Financial Group of Companies, of which Greg and I are the co-owners. We started the company over 30 years ago. It involves an emphasis only on government leased property. For 30 years, that has been the emphasis of the entire Genesis Financial Group personnel and programs. We have established the same program that we're talking to you about in the United States and in Europe. And while in Europe, your president, Jose Maria Figueres, saw us there and invited us to come to Costa Rica. That was 20 years ago. So we had the privilege of coming to Costa Rica and establishing on the Bolsa the first product that was based on equity and not on debt. It was a very successful product. We've been invited back, and we're here. In the meantime, we have been taking care of pension, retirement funds, private offices, and other interested parties with the same project all over the world. In 2004, we assembled a REIT based on the same system and same project that we're showing to you, and it went out on the New York Stock Exchange 11 times oversold. And my wife and I had the privilege of standing there when it happened, and we were shepherded away quickly from the trading stand because they were afraid that we were going to get suffocated with the number of people that were coming. Genesis Financial Group has been the property manager for all these properties for many years. The U.S. government has engaged the Gallup poll, the Gallup poll, to do a survey of each building every 2 years. And they asked the tenant, how well is this building being managed? And we're proud to say that for over 20 years, the Genesis Financial Group Management Group has been in the 90+ percentile of all the polls that Gallup has conducted with respect to the tenants in the buildings that we have managed. So when you hear the presentation, you will understand that the fund is very conservative, the investment is very secure, and the quarterly returns are very predictable. The fund will provide stability and diversification of your invested funds. And oh, by the way, the investment is based on the highest credit in the world, the United States government. It pays its rent whether it closes down the government or not. It pays its government whether it has other issues because the payment of rent is superior to its other obligations. We have never, in the 30 years we've been doing this, ever not had a rent paid every month. So with that, that's the introduction. Now we'll get into the program. Thank you.
Muchas gracias al señor Barton por sus palabras. Invito a pasar de la misma forma a Gregory Scott Barton, quien también tiene unas palabras para ustedes.
Well, buenas tardes. It's wonderful to be back. We were in this club about 18 years ago, presenting the same exact presentation as the government fund that we were sponsoring through the Bolsa last 2005. And it's great to be back. Very consistent program that we have sponsored for 30 years. And it's a very unique product that is found only through our company in the United States. We started Genesis Financial Group, as my father had said, 30 years ago. And we wanted to create a company that had a very unique asset base. And by the luck of, real estate, we were introduced to a post office developer that was developing post office throughout the United States. And at the time, we were raising funds from high net worth individuals, and we bought our first post office. And ever since then, which was 1994, we've structured these government-based funds for high net worth individuals, for pension funds throughout the world. And as Jim had said, we actually were the first entity in the United States to create and go public on the New York Stock Exchange in 2004. Why is that important? I think with regard to what we're looking at today with the pension funds here, Europe, United States, that diversification has become a very big issue. I think the cash levels that are found in pension funds need to be diversified out of debt funds, certainly not into EFTs or any type of New York Stock Exchange companies. And with our base being the U.S. federal government, we get paid, as Jim had said, even if the U.S. federal government shuts down, which it has over the last 3 or 4 decades, the government still pays their rent. The fund basically is going to be holding government office buildings such as FBI, Social Security, Veterans Administration properties for very long terms, typically anywhere from 30 to 40 years. This is a product that we manage directly in the United States. We currently manage 44 government buildings for private individuals. Our largest asset is actually managed for a German pension fund in Washington, D.C., and it's over 1 million square feet. And the scalability of the product, there's over 8,000 leased buildings in the United States that the government occupies. So from a breadth of the market, which we'll look at later today, and the ability to scale up or scale down, we can really bring into a pension fund, into a SAFI, into a private family, this type of product, and it will always have the government lease that is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. We've always looked at this product as a bond alternative due to the fact that it is in government real estate. It's a hard asset. It's not in a bond fund, and we look at it as a fixed return. Certainly we can't guarantee the return, but again, it's really based off of a spread over the 10-year treasury that we'll also look at today, typically 2 to 250 basis points plus appreciation in the property. So again, you're looking at single tenant government buildings in our fund, leased long-term to the federal government, quarterly distributions, and long-term hold from a standpoint that this is a foundation product. It's not something that's traded. It's not correlated with any of the stock markets or debt markets in the United States. And it's a standalone fixed product, again, that we have structured and have managed and have disposed, if needed be, from a liquidation standpoint at the end of the investment for the investors for 30 years. And again, excited to be back here to do the presentation, and you'll see that the consistency, a lot of familiar faces in the room from over the time that we've talked and presented to different pension funds throughout the city. It's great to be back, being registered here in San Jose, in Costa Rica. We're not a U.S. fund coming to Costa Rica. This is actually a Costa Rican-based and registered fund, both the SAFI and the U.S. government fund through the Bolsa and through the Bolsa and Civil. Thank you. So with that, I think we can go into the presentation, Bernardo. Thank you for your...
Gracias al señor Scott por sus palabras. En la misma línea, queremos presentar a la señora Lauren Barton, quien posee vasta experiencia en la industria de bienes raíces comerciales, presidente y fundadora de Beer Wells Investment Realty, graduada de Goddard College y también de la Escuela de Teología y Psicología de Seattle. Es corredora de bienes raíces certificada en el estado de Washington y también en el estado de Michigan. Se especializa en la adquisición, desarrollo e intermediación de propiedades arrendadas al gobierno federal de los Estados Unidos. En sus años de experiencia ha estructurado y negociado oportunidades de adquisición para clientes americanos e internacionales, tales como Genesis International, Genesis Financial Group y otros clientes enlistados entre los 100 americanos con mayor riqueza. El fondo de inversión que presentamos hoy está pensado para inversionistas con un horizonte de inversión a largo plazo y que desean participar de una cartera inmobiliaria fuera de nuestras fronteras. Para conocer los detalles de este nuevo fondo, invito a pasar al señor Bernardo Arce, cofundador de Génesis Latam SAFI.
Sí, está aquí.
Usted me indica nada más.
Buenas tardes, muchas gracias por la asistencia. Como decía don Jim Barton y Greg, hace 20 años estuvimos haciendo lo mismo aquí en Costa Rica y la crisis del 2008 tuvimos que las noticias de Estados Unidos eran muy malas y aquí seguimos, yo seguí con el ejercicio en Estados Unidos, así que llevo también 20 años de estar involucrado con el tema de edificios alquilados al gobierno federal. Y ahora que volvemos a hacer el edificio de regularnos y supervisarnos aquí en Costa Rica. Es una empresa TICA, es una sociedad anónima, que compra básicamente edificios o únicamente edificios alquilados al gobierno de Estados Unidos. Nada más. Nosotros no compramos ni desarrollamos con otros negocios. Es una iniciativa de la familia Barton y mía en esto de venirnos a regular y tratar de participar en un momento importante dentro de lo que está ocurriendo con el país y con la creación de los fondos de pensiones. Hace 20 años no existían, era un poco más complicado y aún así fuimos exitosos colocando el producto en el mercado. Los directores de Génesis, los tres, Lauren, Greg y Jim, tienen más de 80 años de experiencia acumulada en esto y yo 20 años de estar en esto, tratando también de entender cómo este producto se puede ajustar o tropicalizar a la legislación nuestra, tanto legislación por lo que es típicamente legal, pero también por los temas impositivos. Nosotros únicamente entramos en edificios para este ejercicio de Costa Rica ya existentes, con el contrato de arrendamiento. Nosotros compramos de los desarrolladores que tienen el contrato de arrendamiento de 10 a 20 años esos contratos. ¿Por qué? Porque en realidad lo que estamos comprando son flujos de caja garantizados por el gobierno de Estados Unidos. El desarrollador que adquirió ese edificio eventualmente tiene que venderlo para seguir en su actividad, que es desarrollar edificios. Nosotros somos proveedores de liquidez para ellos y participamos en un mercado que es muy dinámico. Allá un edificio no se compra para quedarse con el dueño 10 ni 15. Se compra y si uno quiere salir a venderlo, hay un mercado para eso. Y eso es lo que nosotros hacemos y es lo que la señora Lauren Barton sabe hacer. Manejamos una base de datos de edificios de diferentes precios, con diferentes perfiles en cualquiera de los 50 estados y entonces muy rápidamente con los fondos podemos accesar a esas necesidades. La figura que se usa en Estados Unidos para registrar el edificio es una LLC, es una Limited Liability Corporation, es una sociedad de responsabilidad limitada. Y se usa, no es solo nosotros, típicamente se ha sido un edificio de estos, una estructura de estas se hace porque la LLC no paga impuestos. No paga impuestos no quiere decir que no paga del todo, pagan los dueños de esa LLC. Y entonces la LLC eso es lo que se conoce como un pass-through, una entidad que no paga impuestos a nivel de estructura, pero pagan impuestos a nivel de los dueños. Cada edificio es una LLC. tiene un tema de riesgo independiente. Cuando financiamos esto en Estados Unidos, los bancos no nos aceptan que un crédito sea para varios edificios. Cada edificio tiene su propia línea de crédito. Porque acuérdense en este ejercicio apalancamos positivamente hasta un 60% para incrementar el rendimiento. Y ahora en el transcurso en esta misma presentación, Greg les va a explicar cómo es que las tasas juegan hoy favorablemente para este ejercicio nuestro. ¿Cuáles son los beneficios de esta inversión? Primero, los alquileres son de 10 años o más. Hay alquileres hasta 20 años y normalmente una agencia del gobierno se queda en promedio 30 a 40 años en la misma oficina, en el mismo edificio. Se buscan edificios que tengan campo para expansión porque hay eventualmente mejoras que alguna agencia del gobierno necesita y las mejoras las pagan ellos, las ampliaciones de edificios. Y se hace un acuerdo de pago y de alquileres de tal manera que el que financia las mejoras de los edificios es el gobierno federal. Permíteme, devolverte un momentico. 30 años, los contratos que se firman allá son contratos por el término del contrato. Si son 10 o 15 o 20, el gobierno los tiene que honrar en su totalidad. Si por alguna razón el gobierno decide dejar un edificio, tiene que honrar la totalidad del contrato de alquiler. Yo soy tico, pero tengo que hacerlo muy claro de que los gobiernos de aquí no tienen eso. Los gobiernos de aquí nuestros, en 90 días le dicen nos vamos y dejamos las oficinas vacías. Allá no se puede hacer. Entonces la estabilidad de esos contratos es muy importante porque nos permite hacer un producto altamente predecible. Devuélvete un momentico. Bueno, y lo otro importante es, nosotros compramos edificios donde el gobierno tiene misiones estratégicas. Misiones estratégicas significa que son, por ejemplo, seguridad social, donde llega la gente con menos recursos a buscar en las ciudades de alto crecimiento, como Nueva York o como Houston o como las ciudades de alto crecimiento. Esos servicios, algunos se pueden dar virtuales y ya lo vivimos durante la pandemia, que favoreció a los inversionistas porque no había que darle mucho mantenimiento a los edificios, no había que invertir mucho, pero hay servicios como el tema del FBI o la CIA, eso no se puede hacer virtual. Además de que ellos hacen inversiones muy importantes por temas de seguridad. Entonces, pensar en que se van a ir les cuesta mucho porque hay una inversión del gobierno. Aquí hay algunas cifras relevantes que quiero que sea Greg el que las lea. Greg, can you do that for us, please? Porque él está más al día en esto. Yo estoy al día, pero él lo explica mejor que yo. Hay que aceptar que es mejor que yo. Don Greg, go ahead, please.
Yeah. I think in addition to what Bernardo was saying with regard to the government buildings, with the leases being long-term, the government cannot cancel the lease. If there's a different president that comes in, a different Republican or Democratic Party, these leases are fixed. They're non-cancelable leases for the time period of the lease term. And I think the other additional item that Bernardo was bringing up that's unique to the government building is the large investment that the federal government puts into their buildings. Typically, depending on the type of agency, if it's more of a social security or administrative type building, the government might invest anywhere from $15 to $30 a square foot. If you're talking, like Bernardo said, on a immigrations or an FBI, we've seen the government invest over $300 a square foot into these buildings. So the fund is buying the actual building, the government is occupying the building for long term, and they're also investing in the fund's property. It's not fund money going into these government buildings for the improvements. It's actually funded by the agency and the U.S. government that's improving the value of these buildings long term as well. Switching from the leasing to more the economics and the returns, I've put a slide here. It's an 18-year example of the Treasury, the bond spreads, and the cap rates. The capitalization rate is the return that we would buy the government building at, which is the darker blue on top. And if you can notice, if I can use my thing here, right here is your financial crisis. And you can see in 2008, the U.S. Treasury bond plummeted due to the fact that there was a flight to quality and everyone was buying bonds, which drove the interest rate down, which temporarily moved the capitalization rate up on government buildings due to the fact that everyone was very concerned about their financial holdings, and that tended to have across the board, across the market, sell-off with the stock market, the debt market. But on the real estate, you can see that it was very temporary and that it leveled out. And pretty much for this 20-year period, going across the blue is the rates that we would be purchasing these government buildings going forward. And the spread basically between a U.S. 10-year Treasury and what we're purchasing, having the same federal credit, as Jim had said, is actually a superior or senior credit over at U.S. Treasury bond is a U.S. government lease. So in theory, if it ever happened, the government would have to default on the U.S. Treasury bond prior to actually defaulting on a lease. But looking at this example, you are buying that credit, you're buying a fixed asset in a real estate office that the government is actually investing into, and you have anywhere over this 20-year period through the pandemic, you can see here at the end, basically in this area here, that the market was going down, but you can see that we were very consistent and predictable with regard to the pricing of our product. And this line here, which is very important to our fund, is the debt constant. So anytime that that upper line was above that constant, is that we're making positive leverage. So with the fund having a 60% loan to value, historically, if we're buying properties in 6, 6.5, 7, and the 10-year Treasury plus, let's say, 150 to 200 basis points, which is currently the spread pricing for U.S. debt, it gives us a boost to our return by using the 60% leverage. And as of today, this is as of the end of last year, the U.S. 10-year Treasury is actually pricing at 3.4%. So if I was to extend that one more time, you would see that the Treasury has come down and that the debt constant would be back into a positive position. So again, coming into the market today versus last year, we're buying at better pricing, and the debt market really has leveled off to where we were in the pricing and the spread. So again, the timing is everything in real estate, as you know. And in the United States, with interest rates being where they're at, and with us having our ability to go through the entire country and have an inventory of all the leases, it allows us to really pick and choose locations throughout the country that you'll see. And again, the pricing is to our benefit as of today. How do we do this? There we go. Very quickly, this is a slide, and I'm sure we can send it to everybody. These are different grades of cap rates for the long-term leases. So the bottom long-term is 10 years plus, which obviously will be a more costly or lower return because of the length of the lease. And also going through the United States, there's opportunities for us due to the fact that the U.S. government renews their leases over 95% of the time. So if we look at a building and it has maybe 5 years left, which is the second line from the top, we would have a premium in the pricing. But knowing in our due diligence prior to putting it into the U.S. government income fund, we would have determined with the government if that building still fits the mission of that agency, and we have a very high probability of buying that building with a shorter term lease, but also knowing that the renewal rate and the extension of that current 5 years would be in upwards of 10 to 15 additional years. So again, there's different barbells, as we call it in the industry, where you could buy long-term leases, you could buy mid-term leases, and you could buy some short-term leases, and you have a blended return. As you can see, the 5 and the 10-year, it's probably hard to see, but the average cap rate blended over the last 5 to 7 years on long-term leases is 6.5%. And that is cash, that's not a leveraged return. And again, I can share these slides with you as we go. Again, as I had said earlier, the government leases and occupies over 8,000 government buildings throughout the country. Certainly Washington, D.C. on the East Coast and Virginia is all tied into the D.C. market. Texas is a very large market. California, of course, is a very large market for the government. But you can see pretty much throughout the entire country, every single state in the United States has government buildings for FBI, for immigration, for Forest Service, for example. Veterans Administration is very, very popular right now due to the fact that a lot of the older veterans are needing more medical care, and they've been upgrading their medical centers. And in the presentation further in with Bernardo, after I'm done, all of the pictures that you see in the presentation are true examples of government buildings in the United States. We don't own any of them, but those are examples of different agency type buildings. The pamphlet that you'll have here after is a FBI building in Tampa, Florida. We're working with the developer on potentially purchasing that into our fund. It's a 30-year lease, newly developed. And just as an example, they put over $6 million of tenant improvements in that building. So again, this is kind of the structure and the consistency and the safety that is found inside of these government offices that we have proposed to put into the fund, and certainly prior funds in the past. I think I am, oops. Another example, the U.S. government. People are concerned. They've come up to me. They're concerned about the government. What happens if they don't come back to work after COVID, after the pandemic? And all of the leases, as I had said, are firm. They are not cancelable. We had offices in the United States, as Bernardo had said, that had nobody in it. We had zero occupancy for months during the lowest part of the pandemic, and the government still paid the rent. We still managed the buildings, and we're finding now that most of the government agency workers are back about 80% across our buildings. And here, what they've tried to do in the U.S. government is they tried for a while to do short-term leases because they thought that would be more beneficial to the government and that the lessors would give them a better deal. But they've came to find out that certainly with a shorter lease, you have more risk as an owner, as a developer. And over the last 5 years, you see that the two charts basically are the lengths of the typical lease in the U.S. government, which as of 2020, it's at almost 15 years. So again, long-term, consistent, predictable income paid directly to the fund, to the property from the U.S. government on a monthly basis. Bernardo?
Yes.
Thank you.
Gracias, André. Muchas gracias. Bueno, ya para describirles el fondo que estamos ofreciendo en el mercado ahora, es una emisión de $50 millones. El fondo se llama US Government Income Fund, Fondo de Inversión Inmobiliario en dólares no diversificado. Aprobado, la SAFI fue aprobada en el 2021 y el fondo fue aprobado el 17 de noviembre y ya completo los requisitos en febrero, el 17 de febrero. El fondo está inscrito en Bolsa, estamos calificándolo y cumpliendo con todos los requisitos que algunos de ustedes como inversionistas van a requerir. Bueno, un poquito la descripción del tipo de inversionista que andamos buscando, que tengan capacidad patrimonial y de liquidez, pretendiendo de que no sea un fondo que sea muy volátil desde el punto de vista, aunque las participaciones valgan 5,000 colones, que no sea muy volátil a las participaciones al detalle. Las vamos a necesitar por los requerimientos del regulador de que necesita 50 inversionistas. Pero sí se necesita ser sofisticado en el tipo de instrumento que estamos ofreciendo. Estamos, ¿verdad? En la última. ¿Tan rápido se fue eso?
No, quedan más.
Bueno, esto es el valor de la participación, lo que les decía, $5,000. Se representa en anotación en cuenta y el cálculo de la participación se hace dividiendo el valor del activo neto entre la cantidad de acciones. Les voy a hablar un poquitico, que es muy importante, porque dice, ¿cómo manejan ustedes edificios en Estados Unidos? Son estos señores que tienen 25 años, 30 años de estar en esto, que se dedican exclusivamente al gobierno de Estados Unidos. Maneja más de 44 propiedades ahorita y ubicados en 19 estados. Entonces, no podíamos salir a hacer un fondo de estos a buscar quién nos manejaba esto. Es gente que está en esto. Y además son socios de la SAFI. Ahí tuvimos una negociación con su jeval por el tema, y ustedes lo van a ver, tema de conflicto de intereses, pero aquí no podíamos ir a buscar hacer este ejercicio con gente que no conociéramos. Ya ellos han estado aquí 20 años. Entienden un poco de la regulación y saben de que sí, que aquí hay que portarse muy bien. La parte más importante de esto es identificar esas zonas de alta plusvalía y estar monitoreando qué está pasando en los procesos de arrendamiento. Y ese es el expertise que maneja doña Lauren. Ella tiene 20, 25 años de contactos con desarrolladores, con los bancos que financian este tipo de ejercicio. Recuérdense, nosotros apalancamos hasta un 60% del valor del edificio con un banco norteamericano. ¿Por qué? Porque es importante apalancarlo positivamente para mejorar los rendimientos. Y otra razón muy importante es el escudo fiscal de los intereses. Esto sin carga financiera, ustedes podrían tener el fondo, un montón de plata en caja y un montón de plata para pagar en impuestos. Entonces es apalancamiento positivo, tratando de crear también una situación fiscal eficiente. Yo creo que estamos, ¿verdad? Aquí les dejamos los contactos de don Jim Burton, don Greg Barton, hay página web y por ahí hay unos brochures. Y aquí en Costa Rica yo me quedo viendo a ver qué hago con ustedes, a ver si salimos adelante con la gente que nos ha ayudado en esto desde el principio. Porque yo me había salido de esto a estructurar aquí, tuve que volver a conocer caras nuevas y por dicha estamos jóvenes todos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ambos por su presentación. Hemos llegado al momento cumbre de este evento. Es precisamente el toque de la campana que da la bienvenida oficial a este primer fondo de inversión inmobiliario de la empresa Génesis Latam SAFI. Se preguntarán ustedes por qué tocamos la campana, ¿verdad? Bueno, es una tradición que se remonta a los años 1800. Desde ese entonces, en la Bolsa de Nueva York, se golpeaba un gong con un mazo para marcar el inicio y el final de la sesión bursátil de cada día. En 1903, cuando la Bolsa de Nueva York se trasladó a un nuevo edificio, se sustituyó este gong por una campanita. Y es justamente lo que vamos a hacer ahora. Esta tradición cobró fuerza a nivel mundial y en la actualidad, en las bolsas de valores, todo el mundo toca esta campana. Entonces, por eso, queremos invitar a que se pongan en pie. Y también a don Carlos, que me va a ayudar con las campanitas y las banderas para tocar la campana. Pueden colocarse adelante más bien, tal vez.
Adelante.
Ajá, adelante. Sí, les agradezco. Thank you. Ok, entonces a la cuenta de 1, 2, 3. Agradecerle al panel principal por su participación y agradecerles a todos por acompañarnos en este acto, también a la gente que está en sintonía de nuestras redes sociales. Para la Bolsa Nacional de Valores es un verdadero placer celebrar la llegada de nuevos emisores y nuevas emisiones al mercado costarricense. Los mejores deseos para este nuevo fondo, y a quienes están de manera presencial los invitamos a disfrutar de un cóctel. A quienes están de forma virtual les agradecemos por haber participado de esta actividad. Tengan muy buenas tardes.